Hi friends, host Eric here, talking to famous people. I wasn't planning to make another video tonight, but I have to respond to this nonsense. So let's see here. Yoshi Perspective says, I'm done. Your definition of TI is so biased, he means biased, and contingent on how you personally experience it. And you're so zoomed in on technicals that you completely miss what he's saying and nothing you say even makes sense. Okay, so let's make clear on what this sentence means. Watching my video made Yoshi mad. That's all this says, okay? And he didn't understand it. I feel sorry for everyone that watches you and thinks you're smart, and that's why they can't understand you. No, actually, most of my audience can't understand me. It's kind of why it's a small audience. Because smart people understand me. Interesting that this guy is actually in school for psychology and learning about people and their psyche, and you, without any of this knowledge, obviously are just going to sit there and disagree based on your own arbitrary ideas, like what the frick, dude? I don't understand why people with no interest in actual psychology and no knowledge in the field just dive into just MBTI and think they can properly understand the system without the knowledge of the rest of psychology, like little kids playing with Lego models. Of course, I'm actually quite knowledgeable about psychology in general, way more knowledgeable than Yoshi here, and probably at least as knowledgeable as is a psych. I did, after all, teach psychology in high school, teach it to high school students, but I mean, regardless, the point is these are the sort of things that NTPs research and master very easily. I'm obviously extremely knowledgeable about all kinds of philosophy and psychology things. The reason I will explain here, I use some terms I use as a way of making things more clear to people. So he says this is so difficult to watch. It's like you say, everything you say is arbitrary with no actual studies to back anything. I'm making logical, rational arguments, okay? There are two kinds of theories. There are those that begin with observations and are theories that are constructed to explain those observed behaviors and observed phenomena. And there are those that begin with intuition and then observations validate or fail to validate them. As I've said many times before, this is the latter kind. Plenty of my observations do validate those. We have lots of empirical data, which you're ignoring, because it's not organized the way you want it to be. So far you've not responded to anything I said in the video, right? Not a single thing I said except to say that you don't understand it. Where's the term mapping tools? So the thing is, a mapping tool, what I mean by that is words like if, and, not, or, they don't mean anything that links to the world. They're all about the speaker's relationship to things, right? And, or, you know, if A then B, and A therefore B, it doesn't matter what you put into A, B, right? It doesn't matter what statement you put there. It's always going to be valid, necessarily the case, because of the meanings of the word if. That's a mapping tool. In reality, things aren't always necessarily the case. There is no such thing as absolute validity, right? In reality, in the concrete world. But there is in language because of these mapping tools, which are technically called statement connectives. I use the term mapping tools so that people who don't like the big words can understand it better. Instead, you just throw this right back at me as though trying to make myself clear is a problem. Okay. What validates the statement that it's different from someone's logical linkage to reality? Well, as indicated, it's because if I say Joe went to the store and I change some of those words, right, it matters. The truth value of the statement changes. If Joe actually went to the store, then it's true. If I say Joe went to the park, then it's not true if Joe went to the store, actually, right? But if I say if A, then B, and A, then necessarily B, doesn't matter what words I put in for A and B. So that's the difference. Because in the latter example, I'm talking about logical relationships between symbols. In the former example, I'm talking about concrete objects in a concrete reality. Note, you are not addressing anything or rebutting anything I say. Are you just making this all up as you go? I've been working on understanding cognitive functions for years now, testing with typing people day after day. You ignore all of my SI experience, right? I've got lots of examples of actually typing people, testing ideas out, and then finding out if they work or not. Finding out if there is a strong correlation. I have plenty of examples of tests that I've thrown actually don't work. Plenty of examples of tests that I've kept because they do, etc. TI is subject to the information of empirical data. Of course, as I just stated, I've got lots of empirical data to back this up. All of my argumentation is made public so that people can argue against it. Azura Psych did a good job of asking challenging questions. You, on the other hand, have responded to nothing I had actually said in the video. You're just expressing your frustration at your own inability to understand and the fact that you perceive me as arrogant. It is not true that ENFPs will not be able to answer your TI questions. Of course, you will come to that arbitrary conclusion. It's not an arbitrary conclusion. Because this is the thing, I can identify somebody as an extroverted intuition dominant person. And I can usually do that well before I do a TI test. And every time it has come out that when I've identified somebody as extroverted intuition, they have either been TI tool or TI blind. That's how the empirics have played out. I know it's a little bit surprising to me too. I was surprised, as it turns out, that these ideas are more rock solid than anybody would have expected. That it is more 100% across the board than anybody would have expected. The funny thing is, nobody is surprised at the idea that there is such a skill as verbal reasoning or logic, right? Why they insist it not be linked to a cognitive function is beyond me. If it's not linked to TI, what is it linked to? Is the problem, Yoshi, not your typological stack, but just that you're stupid? That's the alternative, right? Wow, it's like you completely missed his point he was making. He's not linking giftedness to TI problems. He's specifically saying that your example, an ENFP with no TI, would be able to answer your TI questions with ease because that has high IQ. I disagree. I absolutely did not miss his point. And this is the kind of bullshit I'm talking about, right? I'm not even going to answer anything else he says. This is the kind of bullshit I'm talking about. I did not miss his point. I disagreed with it and countered it. I said, as a matter of fact, if you insist that anybody who has a high IQ and is gifted is somebody who does well on verbal reasoning questions, then number one, you've not taken very many IQ tests because only some of them include verbal reasoning questions. And number two, if you're saying that to be intelligent, you have to do well on verbal reasoning questions, then Yoshi's definitely not intelligent. He's able to pass on TI questions, but he doesn't do good verbal reasoning overall. This is terrible verbal reasoning. He says, I missed the point when clearly I responded to it. I understood it and responded to it. Unlike what Yoshi's perspective is doing here. He's not understanding and responding to what I'm saying at all. He's just attacking. So just because verbal reasoning skills and logic questions are the same kind of questions that may appear on some IQ tests doesn't mean they aren't linked to cognitive functions. So for example, there are also spatial reasoning skills that links to a cognitive function as well. I'm not very good at the spatial reasoning questions. And it's also true that I'm not TE front stack. TE and NI seem to link somewhat to the spatial reasoning questions. Now, I don't ask those kind of questions, that's true. If I did ask those kind of questions, Yoshi, you're insisting that solving problems of a TE or TI nature is inherently a matter of high IQ, a general quality that one owns, and that all personality types can do logic and reason just as well as any others. Then why do we have things called NTs, intuitive thinkers, and NFs? What's the difference between an NF and an NT? If it has nothing to do with logical thinking or rationality, why are some of them thinkers and some of them feelers? If verbal reasoning skills have nothing to do with introverted thinking, then what is introverted thinking? Note that there's no alternatives being presented here. Nobody's saying we should instead attribute verbal reasoning skills to something else. The only thing he's attributing to is IQ in general, as though it has nothing to do with typology or attentional manners. But if it doesn't have anything to do with attentional manners, then what is TI? It's a deliberation function that does what? How does it operate? Give me some meaningful alternative to what I'm saying, at least, before you shit on what I'm saying, right? Or are you just ignorant of IQ? So anyway, this guy is not answering anything I say. He's ignoring everything I say. And this is the kind of shit that pisses me off, right? It's like, I go to the trouble to answer all those questions of somebody who's actually asking good questions, trying to challenge me in a meaningful way. And because I give good and meaningful answers to those questions, I get attacked by this guy who clearly countervalues TI and or is extremely threatened by me. And that pisses me off. It's super annoying. At least respond to what I fucking say. Don't say, you're just making this up. Point to something I said and what's wrong with it. What is IQ? If in fact you can attribute doing well on verbal reasoning skills to IQ, wouldn't it be the case that INTPs would have high IQs and they have TI in the first slot? So what thing does that link to other than verbal reasoning that also correlates with IQ? I mean, if you just think a little bit about it, right? What is it that ISTP, ESTP, INTP, ENTP is good at in terms of a judgment skill or a deliberation skill, right? Because there's not any pushback, it seems like, when I say that FI is a deliberation function that deals with high resolution data and the very complex variables and vectors of emotional choice. I don't get pushback there. I don't get pushback on most everything like this except for the TI thing. And the reason is Yoshi feels dumb. He can't understand that video. And I agree, I went fast. I didn't take a lot of time to make sure I explained things super clearly. Because he doesn't understand what we're doing in the first place, right? What we're doing is trying to understand and break down the mechanics of human expression as human beings, consciousness, via attentional manners, the ways of paying attention that we have. We take Jung's basic idea and we try to refine it until we get it right. And we do that with both empirics, testing by typing people. How many people has Yoshi typed? I've typed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And he's talking to me about how I'm just making shit up without any empirics. I've eliminated shit tons of ideas that I once affirmed for some stretch of time as they became proved not to be logically consistent with the other stuff. And when we do good reasoning, have good extroverted intuition and good introverted thinking, we can do great things with that kind of approach, just like Einstein did with the theory of relativity. It wasn't observation first. The empirics were there to validate that the intuitive theory was right, okay? So, Yoshi perspectives, you say you're done, I'm done. You didn't respond to anything I said. You didn't hear, listen, learn anything from what I said. You purposefully or unpurposefully ignored it all, or strawmanned it, or reduced it to something it wasn't, or misunderstood it. If that makes you feel dumb, I'm sorry, but that's not my fault. Regardless, your non-response is exactly that. A non-response that talks a lot more, says a shit ton more. In fact, it only speaks to your own insecurities and not at all to the weakness of what I'm saying. Because remember, to successfully establish something I'm saying is weak or wrong, you have to actually critique something I'm saying. Right? You have to say, Eric said this, and it's wrong because, like that. Otherwise, you're just trying to shit on me. But, I mean, that's like a bug trying to shit on a giant. You're not capable of doing so because you lack both legitimacy from actual engagement with the subject matter and people who are being typed at all. And your intuition's shitty as hell, as we discovered the other night when I talked to you. You've got no concept of what it means to provide a concise answer to anything or provide insight regarding anything. Everything's just an exploratory conversation for you. And now here you are trying to shit on me and the clarity that I bring because you're too dumb to understand it? Sorry, Yoshi. Fuck off.